Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, so the beginning of that might be even just a little bit too off the wall for Crime World, would it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think let's...
Maybe tell a little story. You got called Nicola.
Well, you kind of ruined the punchline there by leading with the punchline. No, I was just telling Eamon I was getting one of my famous sandwich in a box, as people call it, where, you know, even though there's a deli there, I like to get the sandwich that's in the pre-prepared sandwich.
The one that's made at least 24 hours.
Yeah. So I was queuing up at the checkout, and some big dude shouted over at me, "Nicola!" And I turned around and just waved at him. And he was happy and I was happy.
And you were happy.
And what does it all mean? Who knows?
Oh, yeah. You
Who
could
knows?
have just completely ignored him. Totally ignored him.
But I did turn around when he shouted Nicola. So.
Yeah.
It means Nicola's name recognition
is that what it is?
Somewhere
or
way above ours.
Or in some minds we've become merged into
You've
one.
just sort of
You're a
become...
single entity.
Or I've been submerged.
You're an
or
extension
who
of
knows.
Nicola.
Yeah. Actually,
Anyway.
now I'm thinking about it. It's not great.
I actually think you should think more about the sandwich in the box situation. I mean...
Yeah, that's
whenever I'm not around, he has to still go back to the sandwich, the same one.
I suppose that's like a security blanket.
It's like a security blanket, it is,
teddy.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's known the length and breadth of the town.
That's not
for
up
that.
for discussion now. I'm not changing.
He's not changing the sandwich. He's changed a lot of things about himself. He ain't going to do the sandwich.
No.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. The Copiimultis and Stefan Copper-Multi, Eamon. This is a pretty intriguing story given all we have to talk about, but pleaded guilty today?
Yeah, so I mean, he pleaded guilty to a single count of possession of cocaine for sale and supply worth more than €13,000. That was the basic charge. All he said was yes, guilty, and it was sent to another circuit court. And the hearing date has been set up now for next March. But the point was, back in June 2023, when he was caught, he was behind the wheel of a car with a secret compartment, and it was 1.2 million worth of cocaine. And it would have been part of quite a large Garda operation at the time in the ward, North County Dublin. They had information about a vehicle, that was going to be leaving a particular yard, and he was the guy then behind the wheel when they stopped it. So this information, there was nothing said in the circuit court this week. So this information was actually from last year. When he went to the High Court looking for bail, which was refused, and it kind of went through his background to some extent. There's a lot of unexplained wealth. He'd been in Ireland since 1999.
He's originally Moldovan, is he?
He's a Moldovan national.
On a Romanian passport.
And on various passports. There was something like 10 passports found, 10 bank accounts found, and 2 passports at his house. And there was accounts in Spain and one in Moldova and the rest in Ireland. That kind of, there seemed to be kind of, another life going on. There was a Range Rover worth 130,000 registered to his wife outside the house. And then there was something like 230,000 in 5 years had been transferred to a bank in Spain.
Had he a job?
So, yeah, well, it wasn't mentioned in that hearing whether he had a job, but it did say that his boss from a construction company had offered to put up €25,000 for bail money at that time, which wasn't accepted. So they did say it didn't his lifestyle seemed to outstrip what he was legitimately earning without having gone into the details, at the time. But to go back to the actual operation, it was part of Operation Tara, which is kind of a general thing aimed at organised crime. And this one, there was something like 130 officers and defence forces were actually brought in, the specialist search team, and they were searching lands around. And they mentioned at the time there'd be more charges involving other people, which we haven't seen them pop up yet. They might do. He's just pleaded guilty to a single charge, but they did mention at the time, there was phones found, there was vacuum packed blocks of cocaine. I think it was 17 kilograms of the drug vacuum packed that were found in this hidden car, and the hide was described as being very sophisticated. You had to use an electronic fob to open it. So this wasn't somebody stuffing something in behind the dashboard or whatever. This was like a card being basically modified to transport drugs, or certainly that seemed that way. It was all described as a very elaborate, sophisticated system. And then there was the place where he'd come out of. They found 6 burner phones, ledgers, marking different things. Obviously, presumably linked to some kind of commercial activity, whether it was cocaine or not, we don't know. There's the vacuum packing equipment and the whole paraphernalia of drug dealing, as how it was described in court at the time. And then, as well as that, then there was all the kind of the bank accounts and the passports and all the rest, which suggested that he had a different life. He had no history at all of criminal charges in Ireland. And he and this is all kind of suggested that this is why you should get bail at the time. But they did say, look, the state was kind of making the argument that he had the means to secrete himself, as they put it, out of the country with all this money being moved around, that, he'd be able to kind of, be able to live well or whatever, despite, seeming to have some kind of roots here in Ireland, that he'd have the resources to stay away. And just the sheer scale of the drugs find meant that, there's a motivation to someone to go on the run, that they're possibly facing a serious sentence.
Now, we suspect that he is sort of part of a wider, there was that many Gardaí involved in that. It was a major operation for the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. And at the time, they were targeting a number of different individuals they believed were part of an organised crime group, sort of Moldovan origin.
They were interacting as well, obviously, with
Irish criminals.
With Irish criminals, criminals that are...
And in a way, the length of time that they may have been operating, which is suspected to have been over 20 years, this grouping, from what we know of, is that because they can stay under the radar?
Well,
because they're Eastern European. I mean, we've seen the same kind of a situation with the Chypers that we spoke about.
Yeah, I suppose you're going to have a window of opportunity if you come in as a clean skin. Now, I suppose in a sense that their downfall, arguably this particular grouping, they were linking up with another Irish gang that would have roots originally in Finglas, and were, kind of some members of that grouping were based in North County Dublin and in Meath and in the UK as well. And at least one of those has gone on the run, since this operation. That there was kind of, I suppose they don't know whether this was information from Encrochat that came from outside the jurisdiction that was passed on. Like, there is that kind of possibility.
There's that paranoia in everything nowadays, isn't there?
Well, when there's foreign gangs involved, it's a real possibility. It's almost like a weak link now for an Irish gang thinking about getting involved with people with UK links, especially, or links with other jurisdictions where they might have been more active on tracking down people involved in this kind of in organised crime. I mean, the whole thing was like it was an intelligence tip-off, is how it was described. So we don't know the nature of that. And
they definitely had really good intelligence that they were able to catch him literally.
Yeah, and they had a big operation ready to roll in behind it. Once the arrest was made, then they had the search warrants and the specialist teams from the Defence Forces involved as well. So I mean, it wasn't small. There was a lot of cash found. There was €350,000 cash found. Nothing to do with Copper-Multi.
Yeah, and that bail hearing there was an amount of money transferred over a previous, say, 5 years from Ireland to a bank account in Santander in Spain. That was only one bank account out of a number of bank accounts he had abroad, but the money transferred was like nearly over $250,000, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, 230,000. Yeah, it was it's a substantial amount, and that was all. I guess that was all part of the state's case at the time why he shouldn't get bail. Now we'll hear a certain amount more when it comes to the sentence hearing. The fact that he's pleaded guilty just to a single charge might limit how much we get to hear. I mean, sometimes. You get more information in the bail hearing than you do in the sentence hearing.
Bail hearings are great for information, aren't they, really?
They are, but, it's hit and miss, like when you go to them. And they're not generally covered a lot of the time because in the Irish High Court, if someone's in prison, their bail hearing is generally going to be out in Clover Hill, which I think certainly a lot of the agencies find it difficult to get out there. I mean, it's a funny kind of little courthouse. There's 2 courthouses in Clover Hill, and one of them was kind of quite large, and it used to be where the extradition was, and now they've used the smaller one that used to be the district court for whatever reason, and it can be quite jammed, not with any of the prisoners, but just with lawyers and police, because it's usually these bail hearings are often happening within a week of a major Garda operation, and there's a real kind of push on to make sure someone doesn't get out. And it's a lot of kind of serious legal argument, where the facts will be outlined, but then the rest of the hearing is taken up with this very kind of dry stuff about the flight risks and risk to witnesses, and there's a very small number of reasons why somebody can be denied bail in Ireland, basically intimidation and flight risk.
What's interesting about this grouping that Stefan Copper-Multi, was caught up in, and the grouping that were under investigation by the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau at the time, was the fact that they were believed to have been so established that the Gardaí sort of were, I think they had actually a number of raids, not necessarily on Copper-Multi, but on other individuals they were watching as part of the grouping, and they sort of had to abort a number of them, or they were aborted for reasons that they sort of believed that the gang were changing plans or whatever. And then it emerged that there was a concern amongst the Gardaí that they had actually got somebody close to the gang working within revenue. And, was there a possibility that any of this information was coming out? Of course, revenue is a state body that works with the drugs, with all Garda units, and particularly the Criminal Assets Bureau, has an extraordinary amount of information held within its systems. And this individual identified had access to those systems, and there was a concern and a worry. Now that individual was, I think, arrested, but has been through the court system and has not got a conviction, has come out of the court system with a fine, basically.
Yeah, I think it was like during whatever, I suppose, search or arrest or questioning, the person would have been found to have a small amount of methamphetamine and cannabis on their property, not even necessarily theirs. And the charges were struck out at district court level and a donation made to the poor box. So there's no conviction.
And the Gardaí have been informed that the individual is no longer working in revenue, but it was a worry and it was a concern.
Major issue. Because at some point the guards were, at least at some level, were seriously suggesting that they couldn't be working with revenue. Yeah. Obviously, revenue hold in some ways even more information, have access to that information on every individual in the state. I mean, the guards, if they want some of that information, they have to get warrants or get court approval, but revenue have it automatically. So it was, and obviously revenue are always involved in drug seizures. You'll have revenue officers if something comes in at the ports, they'll be there along with the guards. So it was a very serious situation. I mean, one of the other interesting bits is the Irish gang, the Dublin-based gang that were caught up in this would have at one point been very well known that they were clients of the Kinahan cartel. And it just shows by the time these raids are coming along that different networks have become more and more established away from that, the Kinahans, I suppose. And
sort of this sort of Eastern European network, they're not alone. And is there a push on to target some of them that have been growing steadily in the background over the last 2 decades to become a major force in organised crime? There was some news broken this week about an Albanian outfit. Yeah, I mean, an Albanian crime gang, organised crime gang. People might have seen it during the week, the major cab raids that happened in North Dublin. A total of 23 cars and £400,000 or €400,000 in cash were seized during these raids. But this is targeting an Albanian organised crime gang involved in the sale and supply of drugs primarily in Dublin 15, as it's described. Obviously, over the years, that part of Dublin, we've talked about all these Irish gangs from the Westies on and how they've dominated the drugs trade. But you can see here that this Albanian gang, which were also previously targeted in other seizures as well, that you can see that these gangs are starting to really get a foothold. Like, obviously, if you look at the situation in organised crime situation in the UK, the Albanian mafias, as they're called, are probably the biggest suppliers of cocaine. And even in the US, the DEA regard the Albanian mafias as probably one of the primary organised crime organizations worldwide, one of the most serious.
they've become to play a huge part in the drugs trade across Europe. And beyond. I mean, the Albanian mafias are very established in New York, in Israel
and
as
the
well.
UK. Like, I mean, the UK have really believed that Albanian gangs have come to dominate organised crime in Britain.
Yeah, and we see it again coming into Ireland. They see what happened with Albania was it was a communist state and it collapsed in the 90s. And what it was even more communist than the other communist states, if you want. It was an isolationist state. I think by the time the collapse occurred, the only country in the world they really had ties with were North Korea. So it was a deeply impoverished country, but very strategically located. And after the collapse of communism, you know, it has been routinely described, it became a narco state for a period of time. And because of its location, it became the drop-off point for drugs coming in through the east, through Turkey, but also through the ports as well. And the Albanian mafias are not just based there or in the UK. You see it constantly in when shipments are seized on coming from the South America. You'll see these Albanian links all the time. So we have had seizures. Even in Sligo, just earlier this year, we had a guy who was done for cocaine and was described as being part of an Albanian gang. We had another seizure that we can't get into some of the details of it because there's people before the courts, but major court cash seizures and drug seizures all in the last 12 months to do with Albanian gangs. And you know, what they're saying clearly is there's hubs, cocaine hubs, particularly in London.
And there was, like I think in 2019, there was an Albanian grouping also in the same part of Dublin 15, and they were involved in people trafficking. And again, there was kind of high-powered cars and cash taken off of them. And they were suspected of being, I suppose, more involved in device trade rather than
which was one of the traditional things as well.
Like, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, and of course, I know, and they're exploiting vulnerable people from their own country.
There's a couple of things with them, and in particular, the Albanian gangs, Moldovan gangs, etc. They tend to send money home, back to their home territories, unlike other groupings maybe that exist. They will keep it and spend their money within where they're living. But Albania, probably because of its economy, still money is flooding back there, dirty money, and there's, you know, allegations about a blind eye being turned to that. There's an awful lot of human couriers used to bring the cash back even. But are they identifying Ireland as a rich country where they can garner a foothold within the drugs industry and coming here for that purpose? Or are they here, if you know what I mean? Which is coming first?
I think it's a mixture. I mean, without a doubt, Ireland is a market for whether it's the sex trade or whether it's for drugs. So if you have people who have the connections and are able to do it, why wouldn't you set up here? Especially if there's already, you know, a population that have come here for work. So you're not alone. You can blend in with those people who are here for the right reasons. And then when you look at the proceeds of crime legislation, of course you're going to try and get your money back out to a country where institutions are relatively weaker, certainly in the likes of Albania. I mean, I know there's still a lot of work going on between the EU and countries like Romania even still, to kind of bring in kind of this resilience into police and government institutions so that they can resist being bribed and intimidated and threatened. Certainly we've seen it in Bosnia, and you know these countries who I suppose are picking themselves up from from a low state. I suppose, you know, to get to the point where you're going to be as resilient as the institutions are in the likes of Ireland or Holland or Germany or a place like this where it isn't commonplace to simply bribe someone to get your driver's license.
No, I mean, in Albania, the country absolutely collapsed. The level of poverty, even in Albania, compared with other parts of Eastern Europe, was shocking. And what you had was these kind of clans, I suppose, as the country collapsed, these clans took over, really kind of warlords almost. And they also had this clan culture, this kind of like they had this code of honor called Besa, kind of like kind of like Omerta, and they also had those ceremonies. So it was so deeply embedded in the culture, and it's become a massive, massive export.
The thing about the Albanian gangs is certainly they're really feared. They're particularly violent. A lot of the Eastern European groupings. Is it because they're hungriest? You know, they're the ones that really want to make the money. They need to make the money most. Certainly in the Costa del Sol in recent years, they seem to have moved in and taken control and run a lot of other groupings out of it. I mean, only 10 years ago, the Irish were in control of a certain part of the Costa del Sol, no longer.
Yeah.
You know, the Albanians very much, and Russians obviously would be feared by other cultural groupings.
And of course, the Albanian gangs were very closely connected with Dillon, one of the 5 mafia organisations in Italy, basically, because it borders Albania.
It does, yeah.
And they basically used it as a drop-off point for many, many years because of the looseness of customs. So I think we will see the rise of some of these gangs who will fill the vacuum that the Kinahan cartel have left as their presence on the ground has begun to dissipate, you know?
There was one point, I think, I suppose maybe 10 years ago in London where the Albanians had really had the reputation that you were talking about, Nicola, that kind of propensity for violence. And people were saying, are they doing it for the violence or are they doing it for the money?
Yeah.
But one of the, more importantly, one of the things was they kind of upset the economic role or model that drug dealing gangs did. And you can argue that the Kinahans have done something similar, is in that they controlled every single facet of the drug dealing operation, like all the way from the cocoa fields in South America to the point of sale on a corner street in London in an estate.
They took a cut of every little bit of the way.
It was the same gang the whole way.
Right.
And you had one guy at the top making all the money and everybody else got very little. I mean, it was, I suppose, drugs capitalism at its finest.
Well, it was also the wage structure, because Irish drug gangs have always run on a sort of like sole traders.
Yeah.
You know, whatever profit you make, that's what you make. You buy off me, where the Albanian gangs were giving you 300 quid a day.
Well, and as you say, the Kinahan organisation very much came in with that model. They had a wage structure, wage system, and were probably taking, from an Irish point of view at one point, a bit all the way along, or were controlling it all the way along.
Or even the old New York mafia style, everyone gets paid. But, you know, it's the more ruthless, it's the Ryanization of
the top few get rich.
Drug dealing. Yeah. Whereas, like, you know, everyone is on absolutely the basic, and it's cost cutting all the time. And why waste money, like, you know, by giving people a little cut of the profit on the way. So, I mean, it was a really kind of... it was a very, what would you say, I suppose, hungry way of doing it, but it all went to the whoever was at the apex at the very top.
And even there was fascinating things about them having a presence in China, which I've never really heard. I know some of the Mexican cartels also have a presence in China, buying, you know, some of the chemicals that are used to build fentanyl. But the Albanian gangs were over there and involved in money laundering over there as well, which is a sort of a totally just shows the scale of them.
Right. Well, thank you, Eamon. Thank you, Nicola.
Thanks, Niall.
Always a pleasure.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.